Hello, I'm Brady Kapler, Tech Service Rep for BASF here in Nebraska. With me today is Tamra Jackson-Ziems, University of Nebraska Extension Plant Pathologist. Tamra, thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me today.
Well, it's great to have you here, and of course, here we are, another season's underway. We've got corn that's all over the place. We got some that's V5, V6, and then we got some that's just coming out of the ground, maybe some still to be put in the ground.
There's definitely a lot of diversity out there going on in our corn crop stages, and some of that might affect us later, and we should revisit about that then too.
Very good. You know, historically, as we look at diseases in the Western Corn Belt, corn, soybeans, what are things that growers need to be on the lookout for?
You know, right now as we're transitioning out of the seedling stages, we're kind of entering more of the mid-season, and so now's the time as the temperatures are warming up, humidity is higher, and we've had ample rainfall. You know, we need to start thinking about some of the other diseases, like some of the fungal diseases that will develop in response to the moisture.
Okay, anything specific as far as soybeans or corn?
Well, for soybean, you know, we've been looking at Phytophthora root and stem rot the last few years. We'll probably see some of that this year, and especially in some of the areas where they've had some ponding and some wet conditions. For corn, you know, we've got some of the usual players. I expect we'll see some gray leaf spot as temperatures warm up, humidity continues to increase. And of course, we've also been watching tar spot very closely, depending on what part of the state you're in.
Okay, so this year, you know, we mentioned where we are for the weather and everything else like that. Looking at the weather forecast, you know, the last couple of years been pretty dry here in the Midwest, in the Western Corn Belt portion. And as we look ahead, this year is kind of different. We're much more moisture than we've had, and we may be even seeing some cooler temperatures. So what does that lead us to?
The cooler temperatures can be favorable for a few things, something like northern corn leaf blight, the fungal disease. Sometimes we see it early in the season, and sometimes it will keep developing throughout the remainder of the season or kick back up again when temperatures are cooler. We talked about gray leaf spot. Gray leaf spot tends to be favored by those warmer temperatures, averages in the 80s, for instance. And so that's going to be one. It's pretty easy to diagnose. It's a perennial. We see it every year. But the cooler temperatures in particular may be one that we want to kind of monitor tar spot for in those areas where you've had tar spot in the past. And so I would definitely be watching for that one.
Okay, very good. Well, you know, with all that in mind, what are some recommendations you have for growers going forward here into the season, what they need to be vigilant about?
This could turn out to be a little different year than what we've had in the last 2 or 3 years since we do have moisture. I think it's important that people get out and scout and make records of what they've had in the past so they know what the disease history is. And it might be important this year to start scouting early so that we don't have any surprises show up, because we could start seeing some of those normal diseases developing earlier, and we might want to be aware of that moving forward in case we need to make some treatment decisions.
The disease now that we've been talking about, kind of the hot topic disease that we've had the last couple of years, has been tar spot. You mentioned it earlier. So with tar spot, you know, what do we look for in the Western Corn Belt where we've either had it come in late like we have here in Nebraska, or in some areas where they haven't even had it at all? What do they need to be aware of as far as concerning tar spot?
Well, first I'd want to know if I've had a history of tar spot in my immediate area yet, and where is it at exactly? And you know, they can go online and see the live map of how far west we've documented it. Right now we're up to about Highway 281, and so very little disease along there, but it's made it out that far west, and that's about half the counties in Nebraska. It'll continue to move westward once it redevelops this year, and we'll be watching that very closely and alerting people on what to look for. Not that we're worried about treatment on that front edge, but then disease redevelops further east. Further east, where it's been longer for 2 or 3 or more years, we've got enough inoculum built up in some areas that it might require some treatment, but we need to be mindful watching for disease development there.
Now, knowing that tar spot is polycyclic and we have multiple cycles of it that occur, and with the current weather conditions that we have where it's wetter, what do you think that kind of forecast can possibly bring for us?
Well, tar spot is caused by a fungus that's very dependent on weather conditions and especially moisture. And so if we get in a wet pattern where we're having regular rainfall, or even under the irrigation pivot where we're watering frequently, I would definitely start watching for tar spot where you've had a history of it, because it does overwinter in at least the crop debris and possibly the soil.
Okay. Anything else? Any kind of resources or diseases that you'd like to mention?
We've got a lot of resources available to us that are free from extension services, not only in Nebraska but elsewhere. And so I'd check with your local extension service. But also, another multi state resource is the Crop Protection Network. And so there's a lot of news and resources on disease identification and, of course, disease distribution there.
Now, we talked a lot about fungal diseases, and you and I were discussing earlier. What about bacterial? That's one thing that we sometimes forget about.
Well, in part of the Western Corn Belt, bacterial diseases are very important, like here in Nebraska. And so I expect that we're also going to see a lot of bacterial leaf streak development, especially where we've had a lot of rainfall events. But we've had some severe storms too, so we've had some hail in places, and so where some of that corn's been damaged, we may see some redevelopment of GOSs, bacterial wilt and blight. And if anyone needs help identifying or differentiating any of these, look to your local university plant diagnostic laboratory for help.
Very good. Tamra, thank you so much for taking your time, sharing your knowledge and information with us today. We definitely appreciate that.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. And if any of you are looking for further information about BASF products, you're certainly welcome to visit with your local rep, or you can check out our website, which is agriculture.basf.us.